I love video games. And not just because there's some engaging medium which we can explore unique worlds, fight really cool creatures, and learn and hear about some really cool stories. No, I enjoy video games for an additional reason, and it might seem a little bit obtuse, but I truly believe that video games as an art form can change the way we view the world and the way we conduct ourselves in life. Now, this only happens to me every few years or so when one really special game comes around. Think your Elden Rings or recently Clair Obscura Expedition 33. But the one that's changed things for me has been a very odd indie game that you may have heard of, Fear and Hunger. And I think Fear and Hunger has taught me, and maybe could teach someone else, that there's another way to live life. That despite all the chaos and abject despair that's been going around in the world at the moment, there is a way forward for us to live, to be happy, healthy, and fulfilled without having to just play to society's whims. Now, before I delve into this topic and break down my thesis and what I'm going to be talking about more in this video, I just want to preface that even though I won't be delving into the specific triggering topics of Fear and Hunger is an extremely disturbing game. And it covers topics such as sexual assault, murder, genocide, slavery. So obviously, viewer discretion is advised, and if you don't enjoy seeing gore, you will see some of the disturbing imagery from the game on the screen. So, again, proceed with caution. So I'd like to start out outlining what I mean. Fear and Hunger is a game that exists in a world of just objective despair. It's dark fantasy, medieval kingdoms, torture, kidnapping, murder, you name it. It all goes down the line and is all just par for the course. But Fear and Hunger's also got a little more interesting and darker elements that set it apart from other dark fantasy universes that you might interact with. This being the gods, and the kingdoms, and the supernatural forces that assail the normal everyday human population. But among these humans, there are a few in the game that we learn of that find a way to rise above all of it. The whims of the greater kingdoms and the warring factions, and even above the whims of the gods themselves. And I believe these characters who do this are Enki, Nostramus, and Ragnvaldr. And I think it's important that we look at and analyze these characters and what they accomplish in the game of Fear and Hunger, and what we might possibly learn about for ourselves. So I speak of these supernatural elements, but I feel it's best to outline what I'm talking about. The gods of Fear and Hunger are very, very real and very terrifying forces. And gods in this universe represent pure concept. Is Drogorath representing destruction, Sylvian representing life and love, Freyr, the god of the moon, representing the mind, at least in my personal view. And then you have other gods like Venushka, the god of nature and spirit, and the god of the depths, who's the god of darkness and the forlorn and forgotten. These are to name a few, but there's many other gods, such as Helios, the sun god, that we won't be getting into for this video. But to me, these gods represent the primordial forces of the human condition and life, as they are just blank slates. They just simply exist. They have no personality, truly, and they have no goals or objectives. Drogorath simply destroys things to destroy them, and Sylvian creates life to create life. Simple natural cycles. Something that humans could never truly exist in nor understand. And the followers of these cults are lost in the nature of their god. And I think it's important to note this because this is one of the ways humans are really robbed of their agency. The wolf masks in the game who devote themselves to Grogoroth live their life on a singular note of constant cannibalism and murder. And likewise, the Sylvian cults who represent love and life, well, they get entwined in the activities of making life forever and ever and ever. And in the game, if you participate with these cults, you can do it once, but following visits will enthrall your character forever and they will lose their autonomy and it's game over. And while the old gods aren't a focus of this video necessarily, I want to highlight their effects of robbing humanity of autonomy and being able to dictate their own fate. And when they did eventually decide to give humanity an ability to ascend and become more, it was sort of a monkey's paw situation. And that leads me into the new gods. And despite their name, they are anything but. The new gods are humans who have sat upon the throne of ascension within the city of Mahab, and through that they become, unquote, godlike. And in reality, they're humans with supernatural abilities and lifespans, but their power always fades, and their reigns always end with a whimper. In Fear and Hunger 1, there are 4 main new gods we focus on. Francois the Dominating, Chambara the Tormented One, Valtiel the Enlightened, and Nilvian the Endless. And throughout the events of the game, we can see that these new gods aren't really all that powerful, and they're quite egomaniacs who have nothing really to give back to the world, besides the pain and torment they inflict on others. I mean, hell, Valtiel is insane by the end of the game, and we only find him when he's trying to hang himself. And I want to highlight them because, in my view, they represent the empires of mankind. And they also represent the efforts of individuals who seek to impose their one viewpoint and their ego upon the entire world, constantly trying to create a new world order, which another new god, Nashra, detests and says is a waste of time, which is about the only thing I will ever agree with that floating bastard about. And now we come to the final type of deity that exists within Fear and Hunger, the Ascended Gods. And the Ascended Gods are one of the most confusing aspects. They're humans who have reached true apotheosis, but in that process of ascension, they lose everything that made them human, including to some degree a lot of their memories, it seems. As to become a true concept, you can no longer be human and be subjective. And the circumstances that lead to the creation of Ascended Gods, that's a little wonky and not really understood. To some degree, we understand that they have to siphon off the power of an old god, like the God of Fear and Hunger does, and Logic does with Venushka. But outside of that, we don't really understand the process or who's chosen for it. And largely, it seems to be a result of outside forces meddling in human affairs, once again. And I personally see these gods as paradigm shifts for humanity. They're not quite forces of nature, but they are forces of humanity. And I'm thinking things like the Industrial Revolution or organized religion. These wide concepts that spread across to humanity and define how our cultures and civilizations function. So with all this talk of gods and cosmic forces, where does this leave little old humans? Well, it leaves us in kind of a terrible spot. And there are a handful of important humans in this game, but we're not going to talk about all of them. There's only 5 I feel that are worth discussing. And those are Kahara, Le'Garde, Darce, Enki, and Ragnvaldr. No, I'm not going to talk about the girl here. She's an Ascended God, and we already kind of went into that. But I would like to outline that through my analysis of the series, it seems that humans really don't have a ton of autonomy. They're at the whims of greater nations and ascended gods all the time, and the old gods have just straight up abandoned them. So, first up, let's talk about Kahara. Kahara's a fan favorite. If you play Fear and Hunger, pretty much everyone knows him. But I want to outline Kahara because he's one of the more interesting characters to me because he has no ambition. He only wants to provide for his wife and build a family for himself that he's never had. He's also one of the most cowardly characters in the game, and he's willing to backstab you outwardly in order to survive, which I can't really blame him for. The dungeon's a terrible place to be. However, despite the fact that it seems like Kahara is in charge of his own fate and he came to the dungeon of his own choice, I still think Kahara is a puppet, and he was set up by Nilvian only to bring the girl to the altar of darkness and have her ascend into the god of fear and hunger. And in my opinion, Kahara also represents the idea of just burying one's head in the sand and playing the part of the current paradigm or worldview he lives in and only seeking material petty wealth that is, while noble, ultimately for others and not for himself. And flipping over from trying to just survive material conditions of one's current paradigm, we have trying to build the new paradigm with Le'Garde and Darce. Le'Garde is a man written in prophecy and leader of the Knights of the Midnight Sun. He's prophesied to unify humanity and unite the masses against the kingdoms and bring about a new era of peace. And he takes this prophecy very seriously, despite his claims. And he kicks off the entire events of the game. He fathers a child with the new god Nilvin, who is the little girl we see, who eventually becomes the god of fear and hunger, but he wants godhood for himself. And so to do that, he decides I have to get captured in the dungeons of fear and hunger, make it to Mahab, and ascend. Which obviously goes terribly for him, but we can see more of that in Termina. I want to focus on Darce, his lieutenant and right hand. Darce is infatuated with Le'Garde. She loves him deeply and will do damn near anything to see his goals come to fruition. But I think Darce is interesting because of the fact that she only revolves around Le'Garde. Despite having the dominating soul, she doesn't seek to dominate anything. Except in her new god form, we don't talk about that. But her goals of the game is rescue Le'Garde. And in her ascending, it's resurrect Le'Garde. And she does just that. Once again, we see a human who has no true ambition or autonomy. She's dictated by the whims of Le'Garde, and Le'Garde wants to build a whole new world order, which is just as fruitless as all the other new gods have attempted. And speaking of new gods, I want to emphasize, all new gods fail. All new gods have the same goal as Le'Garde, minus the Heartless one. And from Defense of Fear and Hunger 1 all the way to Termina, we know that Darce succeeds. She revives Le'Garde, and Le'Garde sits upon the throne of Ascension. Le'Garde creates his empire, and he creates the Bremen Empire, and sets to work causing great wars and puppeteering humanity, overseeing the creation of the machine god Logic. However, in the end, he still fails. He does not create that new world order where he sits at the top of the throne. In fact, I think he's unleashed something a hell of a lot worse onto the world. And he's just following the path of the rest of the new gods. Francois fails. Valtiel fails. Tries to kill himself. Chambara fails. And biggest failure of them all, Nashra. Nashra, the doom and terror of the man. Yeah, no, he ends up as a burnt head the minute he comes into contact with an actual old god. And point of this is, the new gods try to brute force a new world order. They try to change the world into what they see fit. They put their ego first above all of it, as if they're the only one correct, and this is the only way the world could ever exist. And it's a fool's errand, and we see it time and again. No human could ever achieve that goal of changing all of humanity into one perfect note, regardless of their power or their influence. Reminds you of some people, right? So, that covers Le'Garde, Kahara, and Darce. What about the other humans I mentioned? Well, let's move on to them. Enki, Ragnvaldr, and Nostramus. The three humans who I believe embody human autonomy and fulfillment in spite of the world that is presented to them and the will of the gods. We're going to focus on the first one and the most obscure one, Nostramus. Nostramus was one of the Fellowship, the 4 new gods that came to rule over Mahab. Nostramus traveled with them, and when presented with new godhood, he rejected it. And he now lives in the dungeon, continuing to refine his search for knowledge, a journey without end. And in the events of the game, he's outwardly friendly and joyful. And in Enki's S ending, he imparts knowledge to Enki, which allows him to reject new godhood, keep himself grounded, and shows him the path of true enlightenment. He succeeds where other new gods have failed, specifically Valtiel, who outwardly admits it. Now to move on to my favorite part and favorite character from this game, and the inspiration for this video and a new world philosophy that I hold. Enki is a dark priest, who belongs to a collection of individuals who undertake ruthless rituals to honor the old gods and channel their power, and collect knowledge about the world. Enki comes to the dungeon seeking only that, knowledge. Sure, he has some interest in Le'Garde, but only out of curiosity for why he's the center of this so-called prophecy. And in his S ending, we get to see the path that Enki walks, and it's the same as Nostramus. He learns from conversations with Valtiel that Ascension is a lie, becoming a new god is a trap, and despite all his power and supposed wisdom, he was still left unsatisfied. He didn't even know the basics of if the gods were real or not. And he tells Enki that there is one person who truly knows the path to enlightenment. That is Nostramus. And through his conversations with Nostramus, he learns that the true path of enlightenment is an endless search for knowledge, constantly refining it, constantly learning, never ending. It's a saddening idea if you think about it. There's no one-click answer, but that's the path that's laid out, and Nostramus is fairly happy. So, heeding Nostramus' advice, he takes with him the Soul Anchor. It's something that'll keep him grounded while he's in the void. And he sits upon the throne of Ascension. He meets his new god self. The twisted form it is, wearing nothing but a cage upon its head because of the sheer overload that he has attained while in this form. He can feel, hear, and see everything. And it's a fate worse than death. So Enki rightfully rejects it, and returns from the Grim Hue the same mortal he was when he came to the dungeon. And, following the events of the game, he takes hold of the great libraries of Mahab, which contain almost all human and new god knowledge. And in his endless studies, he finds a secret to immortality, and is stated to become the most powerful human alive. And we see his influence in Termina. We see that he has written the Skin Bibles. He has channeled his knowledge and shared it with humanity. Not for any petty goal of trying to create some new world order, but honestly just because he wants to. Because that's what he likes to do. And while this path, that is never ending, it seems pretty depressing if you think about it, and he's never going to really attain his goal of knowing everything, but he becomes immortal. He influences the world in ways that no one could have ever predicted, and he's still presumed to be alive, continuing to work with Nostramus, and fulfilled. Now to talk about a character who I didn't really pay much attention to when writing this video at first, but upon further reflection, I realized that he too found his own path to enlightenment. Now, it's not at all done through rigorous study and a search for knowledge. It's more done through wanton bloodlust and murder of everything in the dungeon. Ragnvaldr is a character out for revenge. His whole family was killed by Le'Garde in the Knights of the Midnight Sun, and he's lost even more comrades to the Beasts of Darkness in Vinland and the same ones that reside in the dungeons of Fear and Hunger. So, Ragnvaldr, the big man he is, mounts up, heads to the dungeon with one mission and one mission alone. Kill everything. And he does it. He kills every single monster in the dungeon. The Crow Mauler, the new gods, the old guardians, everything. And through this action, he becomes something more than himself. In the game, it's referred to as the god of ultraviolence. Now, I'm not sure he becomes a god, but he does attain some form of longevity, and he becomes a force of such fear and ferocity that all of monsterkind becomes to know his name, and all monsters fear him. And then by the time of the events of Termina, monsters are nearly extinct, considered largely a myth. Now, it should be noted that Ragnvaldr's survival is kind of up for debate. Some say that August in Fear and Hunger Termina is Ragnvaldr himself, or at least a descendant. But either way, Ragnvaldr attains this enlightenment I talk about. He finds this other path in life, existing outside of the current paradigm and forging his own path ahead for him and those who choose to be around him. It's these three characters who I think are the most important takeaways from this game. And it's easy to get lost in the sauce of the darkness and despair and coolness of killing a bunch of monsters and cosmology, but I think the point of this game is trying to tell us that despite a world of objective darkness and misery, we can rise above it. And we see that we don't have to give in to the whims of the world. We don't have to aimlessly chase materialistic desires like Kahara, even if it's for a noble and simple purpose, something most of us could relate to. Nor should we chase after fruitlessly attempting to change the world and sway the minds and hearts of subjective, chaotic, and messy humans. No. The point of this game, I think, is to highlight that we should focus on ourselves. Not in the selfish way, but we should focus on our wants, our desires, our dreams, our goals, and chase them endlessly. Ragnvaldr and Enki's quests are ones without end. Ragnvaldr, ultimately, if he is August, travels to Termina to continue to hunt monsters, to continue to safeguard the world from Lugard and the darkness of the dungeon. And Enki is still down there studying away in the dungeon forever and ever and ever and ever, because that's what he likes to do. There's no endpoint, there's no goal, there's no satisfaction besides the one they feel inside. And I think that's, again, the point. I think we're supposed to, and at least the way I've taken it, we're supposed to live in rhythm with ourselves, our soul. There is no true road less traveled that we can walk. We have to brave total darkness, steel our hearts, and become who we want to be with no guidance or end goal. And I think that's the point of Fear and Hunger. I think that's always been the point. And I think I can cut this part from the video. Hey, if you're seeing this, it means you're at the end of the video, so huge thanks for me. This has been kind of a terrifying undertaking for me. I've always wanted to do something like this, but have had no idea how to do it, and I had no idea if it would sound good or work the way I wanted it to. But seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening. And please sound off in the comments if you also feel there's a game that's changed the way you view the world. I would love to hear what you have to say, or if you think this is poo-poo and stinky, I would also like to hear that too. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Like if you want to, subscribe. I'm going to be making more videos like this in the near future, mainly on whatever I find interesting at the time. But thank you so much for watching. Bye.